We're pleased to offer a presentation focused on the importance of getting support right. Identity and access management solutions span across an enterprise. While it is important to roll out a solution successfully, it is equally important that ongoing support meets users' expectations. In this session, our panel will discuss what it means to build an identity and access management support organization, considerations in going the managed or hosted service route, or relying on your IDaaS vendor to guide you along the journey. Whichever route you pick, the goal is to follow the path that is right for you, with metrics to show that you are aligning with your roadmap and meeting organizational goals and objectives. Darius Bradford is the Principal Solutions Architect at Secure IT. Nazma Ali is the Senior Security Engineer at Ponus Research. And Jerry Castile is the Chief Architect at Pathmaker Group. Let me introduce the partners that are on the call today. We call this our Identity and Access Management Services Partner Alliance. Pathmaker Group, Ponus Research, and Secure IT have been working in this space for many years and have deep levels of expertise in identity and access management.
Thanks, Katie. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us in the third part of the IAM webinar. So glad to have you all. So let's jump right into it. So in this series, so far, our panelists have discussed the importance of planning IAM deployments, where first and foremost, you need to understand and you need to know what your requirements are before you go ahead and jump into developing the solution. Then we talked about the importance of picking the right technology that fits your organizational needs and your requirements, the ones that you have defined within the planning phase, not something that the analyst tells you or what most people are doing. Remember, technology is one part of the triad, but it is one of the most important part of this process. And now, in the third part of the series, we are going to talk about a good IAM support strategy. You have got to know how you are going to take the solution that you have planned for and built, and how you're going to support it. So going forward, it adds positive value to your organization and is successful in the long term. So we start by taking a step back and looking at some of the most common support issues, and then we'll talk in detail on how to avoid them. So the first support issue that I want to cover is operational teams are unprepared. Now, the operations phase is probably the one that receives the least attention in any given project. The support teams, they are brought in much after, or maybe sometimes just before the go-live date to engage with the project. And as a result, the support staff, they do not have the expertise to deal with IAM incidents, even though we know that the vast majority of such incidents, they happen on actual live production systems. They may handle day-to-day operations like, user account issues or password resets, but they are much less equipped to deal with complex software IAM issues or even IAM data breaches. Now, one of the other reasons for this struggle in the support team could also be the lack of proper documentation. Now, IAM solutions, by their very nature, they are quite complex. We know that and we understand that. They are multi-purpose, they can be multi-platform, they are hybrid systems sometimes. Sometimes they need to be integrated with legacy systems, and they're mostly customized for different options that the business needs. And so this complexity for a support team, it gets exponentially worse when there are no detailed records, no proper documentation, very few architecture diagrams, no proper knowledge base, and so on and so forth. And that's where the struggle lies. It is an unfortunate fact that organizations, they treat documentation as an optional formality. Drawing from my own experience as a consultant, I can enumerate examples of problems and IAM issues that I had to tackle and resolve. Looking back, I think those problems could have been solved in a matter of minutes, but because I did not have any proper references or documentation, it was quite daunting and it took at least a couple of hours. So that's one support issue. The third issue that I want to touch upon is with respect to third-party support vendors. Now, vendors and managed service providers, they can be a vital piece of success for companies of all shapes and sizes. But one of the risks that an organization would take is the risk of misaligned expectations. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, for obvious reasons, third-party support teams, they're mostly remote, and they do not have visibility into your business, and they do not understand, therefore, they do not understand your priorities. I can quote another example of a client whose implementation of an SSO solution, enterprise-wide SSO solution that I was doing, it was delayed because of a vendor that would not provide timely help with the customization of an application to make it SSO ready. So the project got delayed. We've also heard of stories where managed service providers, they cause service disruption because they have shut down servers or services or applications during a critical time for the business. So this is one of the risks of having a third-party support vendor that an organization would have to take into account. So for this reason, and maybe others, you may not want a third-party support team, and maybe you instead rely on an in-house team. But it is possible that you may not have factored in the time and the cost to transition this newly deployed IAM solution that you have from the implementation team to the support team. So as a result, the same implementation team, the SMEs, they continue to stay on the project for a much longer time after go live. This team is not only now expected to develop enhancements to meet the changing business needs. For example, let's say you take an identity management solution, you want to enhance it by adding more application targets. So the team is expected to do that, but also they are also playing the role of a support. So they now would also have to develop fixes to address any production issues that come forward. So guess what? Their priorities are completely skewed. They don't know where to turn, and neither job gets done properly.
Now,
so these are, go ahead.
Would you view that as a red flag if you saw an organization that had the same people doing support and enhancements? What are your feelings toward that?
Yes, I think it would be a risk because you have your time is now divided. You are juggling two different kinds of roles. Your time is now divided between development or enhancement of the product, as well as providing support, especially in the initial phases of the project when, just after go live, it is possible that, some issues may crop up, some fixes may have to be done, some bugs are recognized. So you don't know how to prioritize because you have users calling you and asking you to help with basic issues, but you also would have to then, work extra on getting these enhancements ready. So that definitely is a risk.
Exactly. Thank you.
So these are some of the common support issues that I have come across, and I'm sure most of you have heard of. So Katie, next slide. Consequently, as a result of these issues, what do we have? We, of course, have frequent issues that I just talked about. There are operational failures right now that we put and that will put an organization's mission at risk. There is now a greater financial risk, and there are unexpected costs because you're always in the firefighting mode. There is also now the perception of failure, right? Management and other business teams within the organization, they are now going to look at your IAM solution and say, okay, there is a problem with that. That's the one that's at fault. They will blame the technology, they will blame the product, they may blame the support staff. When actually at the end of the day, it is not all of that. It was just poor planning and not having a good support strategy. And finally, the worst thing that could happen is you lose credibility as far as this solution goes. Nobody is going to listen to you when you go up there and say, hey, let's expand this product, add more features or add another solution of the same kind. So all this means you've got to think of support as a critical element of your IAM project, and you need to have a good strategy around it. And so to now talk about those strategy and what can that be, I'm going to pass it on to Jerry.
Thank you, Nagma. Yeah, so, getting to some of the points that Nagma was making and digging a little bit deeper about, how to get support right the first time and out of the gate so you don't, suffer some of those consequences that Nagma was just speaking about. I think one of the first things that comes to mind when we're talking about a support model for IAM, it is very important to get the teams involved with the platforms you're integrating with involved early. IAM by its very nature is connected to everything else, right? It's provisioning users, it's providing access to various platforms, and those various platforms have their own support teams. So kind of lining up your operational processes early on and your plans for how are issues going to be recognized on integrated targets with your IAM platform early and communicated and coordinated across teams is super important. And one of the key ways that you can ensure doing that is by making sure that your design documentations and requirements around how the platform, whatever it may be it a SSO platform or a governance platform, how those platforms are designed and how the user flow and activity flow should work, what expected behaviors are, and also what expected failures might be and what to do in case of those failures. So getting all that stuff organized and communicated in a way to the rest of the operational teams for the application platforms that you're integrating with and communicating that's the key part to the operational teams of those platforms. A lot of times, some of these efforts, one of the sort of patterns you see in implementations that could have gone a little better is that development of the solution exists inside of this sort of bubble. And then, at the end of everything's ready, you hand off this, hey, this is what we've done. And it's like, wow, it's a lot of consumption, but by the teams of the platforms that you're integrating with. So by kind of getting on the same page early on, really can help prevent some of that operational shock of, oh my gosh, this new thing is coming, right? I've seen projects in the past that, you get close to go live and all of a sudden, everybody's wait, we've got some work here to do to make sure the rest of our teams that are involved in supporting other components of the solution are prepared to do. And along those lines, one of the great ways that you can help is by trying to, as best you can, ask yourself the question. We can usually in IT, we're all smart folks, we can come up with a solution for pretty much everything, but just because we can do something doesn't necessarily mean we should do something. And so, to that end, asking yourself, is this customization that we're trying to design within this platform to maybe work around a business process or whatever, is that going to be, what is the impact from a supportability standpoint? Sure, we can take a platform that we've purchased and customize it to, let's say, some business process we have that maybe involves some, external platform. But now, and that will get you from point A to point B from a solution design perspective. But what is the impact of this customization from a supportability standpoint? How is that going to impact the teams that will need to be involved in the skill sets of the folks that need to, do the care and feeding of the solution over time? And we next slide.
And I just want to add to Jerry's previous point about customization. We understand that there are lots of tools out there. There are lots of IAM platforms that are available to us by various vendors. And they do enable, and they do provide a high level of flexibility, which we could use to do some amount of customization. But also they do provide a lot of standard, approval workflows and APIs that we can leverage instead of, just going ahead and doing any customization.
That's a great point, Nagma. We see it all the time with customers where, they might have a business process that they want the product to fit exactly into, right? And in trying to get to that keyhole fit, they work outside of the boundaries of a platform, and that becomes more of a operational support nightmare moving forward than it would be if, with a little extra user education, how to, kind of fit inside the boundaries of whatever platform you use. That's a great point. Which is, I think, a really good transition to this topic around, separating, the solutioning from the support, which is a point that you had made earlier. They aren't the same. They're absolutely not the same. Your solutions folks that are actually doing the development, gathering requirements, figuring out how this fits inside of a bigger picture of a business requirements and delivery standpoint. Those priorities can sometimes not be in conflict, but certainly are different than the priorities of the support structure once you have a solution up and running and in place. Now, does that mean that your solutions folks and your developers don't end up supporting? Of course they will. Usually at a tiered approach. They're not usually the first, tier 1, tier 2. If a solution, God forbid, had somehow made it into a production environment that was causing problems, at some point the developer may have to get involved to help figure it out, right? But there should be enough barriers to making sure that that doesn't happen, so that your solutions folks can continue to deliver on new requirements as they're needed, and your support folks can just focus on the work of making sure that the platform is running optimally, keeping an eye on things like security and performance of the running platform. And there should be, it highlights the need for some program level directorship between the two, right? So there's a handoff between your solutions folks and your operation teams, and say, hey, this is sort of a run book of how you should deal with these issues, what kinds of issues should come up, what kinds of issues you should expect. And also, and at that point, that's where you start talking a little bit about, well, what types of issues might we encounter and plan for that from a support standpoint, and how big of an impact will they have to the organization. And I think we kind of talk about this a bit on the next slide, Katie. So once you've got, whatever the IAM platform is in place, there's new solutions, some new features, one of the discussions that you should be having with your support team is, well, what could go wrong, right? What could happen, as best as you can predict. We don't have crystal balls, but, we could see where usually they happen in places where there's things connecting to something else, or a process is going, butting up against another process. When there are those sorts of issues, identifying how important are they, is every single issue a mission critical thing? Usually not. Some things can be treated as sort of a bug, and, they can be scheduled quarterly for correction. Some things need to be treated as more of a hot fix. It's affecting a large user population, or it's impacting some sort of business requirement in a negative way. But, having that sort of structure of what constitutes something as critical or high or medium or low already defined in relation to what your IAM program's objectives are is super important for helping your operations and support teams to be able to quickly categorize and understand what needs to be priority, so that you can avoid some of these, perceptions issues, because, enough bad problems happen to an IAM program, or visible problems happen, you will start to see some of that loss in credibility that may negatively impact the growth of your IAM program as a whole, down the road. And so, having a clear understanding of what that problem space might be in preparation for issues. I mean, issues happen to everybody, is important, but, coming up with ways to mitigate it, such as making sure your not promoting configuration changes into a customer impacting environment, into production, let's say, before doing adequate testing, and making sure that you're tracking those changes through a formalized release or change management process that's managed is super, super important for being able to identify where problems may have been introduced, especially in these really complex systems. And take advantage of some really great tools out there. And there's a lot of technology out there to make sure that your keystone use cases and keystone processes don't get broken with every single update or release into an environment. And done correctly, that sort of thing can be managed in such a way that happens almost automatically and quickly every time you decide to push a change in front of your users. So working with someone that has a good approach to the management of releases and changes is certainly very important. And to talk a little bit about managed options and services and their impact and choices you should make, I'm going to dish it over here to Darius.
Let's fix that. All right, guys. If you want to do it right, recognize that all managed services are not created equal. Okay, the tactical savings could be expensive in the longer term. So what we're saying is really dig into the line items of that managed service quote and understand the differences in the prices of each line item. Understand what they mean and what exactly that service entails. Okay. Also, make sure you understand their client to analyst ratio. Okay. Understanding that ratio is key. Also ask this question: will you have a dedicated resource dedicated to your account? Okay. This is a key thing also. You don't want to have to bring your MSSP point of contact up to speed every time you call in. You need at least one person there that understands your business, understands your culture, and can handle a lot of the back end things for you. Next thing, IAM solutions span across business units and applications. Mistakes get messy and have noticeable impacts. This is a big one, okay? Because if you do it right, your IAM solution will span multiple business units and applications. What this means for you is that your MSP vendor that's managing this will be highly visible. All the wins and all the losses will be magnified. So as a result, choosing the right MSP organization, is going to be key. You don't want to be in a long-term relationship with the MSP vendor until you validated how they handle triages and incidents, okay? Just recently, I was in the middle of an incident with the client, okay? Really high impact, high profile stuff. I had to call in to the MSSP. So obviously I had to authenticate. That authentication process, them figuring out how to spell my name and figuring out there was not an E on the end of Home Depot, that took 20 minutes, okay? That took 20 minutes just to get to being able to explain what my problem is in the middle of a security incident. That was valuable time being wasted. Look for proven experience in IAM and the technologies you have. It's great to have a vendor that's skilled in IAM, but is that vendor skilled in the IAM product you own? Okay, that's key. Each one is different. They have their own set of nuances and support requirements. So having someone or having a vendor, your MSP, your MSSP being knowledgeable on your particular product, that's going to be huge. Next slide, please, Katie. All right, if you want to do it right, okay, review your solution periodically for viability. One of the big things there is metrics. Use your metrics to analyze your solution health. Some important IAM metrics to stay abreast of. One is the number of agent assistant password resets, There's a real cost to this, okay? And if you're putting a solution in place that puts self-service password resets in, then you're gonna wanna understand what is the cost of an agent doing it, okay? So then you can show a return on investment on this solution, okay? Another important statistic is the average time to provision a user. How long does it take you from new user to user can start working? This is a very, very telltale sign about the effectiveness of your user provisioning process in your IAM. Another thing is, okay, understanding how many unique credentials your users have, okay? This is important. The more credentials your user have, the more likely they are to find shortcuts and ways around it. Tracking this metric can also be an early indicator of at-risk users, okay? So a really important one to have. And don't wait for breakdowns to replace an aging technology stack, right? Cybersecurity product landscape changes at a rapid pace, okay? It's really important to stay in tune with the markets and the trends. Right now, many vendors are starting to cannibalize each other, right? So meaning your traditional SSO vendors are moving into PAM and IGA. Your traditional PAM vendors are moving into SSO and multi-factor authentication, okay? So understanding all of this, stand on top of it, okay? The solution you're looking for may be on a roadmap of the vendor you already have, okay? This could yield a tremendous amount of cost savings, as well as ease of integration and support if it's a solution that you already have in-house and your team is already familiar with it, okay? Also, stay abreast of new technologies and regulations and modernize, optimize as needed, okay? Right now, in the IAM world, zero trust seems to be one of the preeminent buzzwords and technologies in the IAM space. In the next few months, I'm sure it'll be something else, okay? So it's very important to stay abreast of the emerging technologies so you understand what's coming down the pipe. As new regulations and or addendums to old regulations emerge, knowing how this impacts your IAM solution and subsequently your business is paramount. Next slide, please, Katie.
You know, there is, before we jump forward, I think
Yep.
something else that kind of talks towards those ends. We talked a little bit about some key performance and factors you probably want to be tracking. You know, one that comes to mind as well is also, you know, how, you know, from a support perspective, how your support organization is handling things like patches for zero-day vulnerabilities and things of the underlying platforms, right? IAM can be the keys to your literal keys to your kingdom, right? And so keeping that environment as secure and consistently patched to recommended zero-day exploits and things like that is super important, and I think is oftentimes goes, you know, to the wayside. I think, you know, once we put a solution in, there's still a lot of care and feeding, right?
Understood. Great point, too. Thanks. To summarize, a successful IAM support strategy needs you to factor in manageability and supportability as part of the solution design. Remember here, we were talking involving the operations team early on, the importance of that and documenting the design, those design decisions up front. That goes a long way in making your solution a lot more manageable, okay, and supportable down the road, all right? Also, separate solution enhancements and solution supports, all right? As we mentioned earlier, the support skills, the support staff skill set and the enhancement staff skill set is completely different. Your support staff is probably more of an IT person, okay, an IT expert with intimate knowledge on your application nuances that he or she supports, okay? That enhancement person is typically a developer type. Their focus is on features, end user requests, things of that nature. Organizations that have the same person or the same people performing both those tasks should be a red flag, as we mentioned earlier, okay? This is something that could definitely negatively impact you as a customer. So make sure you ask those tough questions there. Set realistic SLAs. Remember, everything's not an emergency, okay? Being able to decipher between what a true emergency is that really impacts your business versus one that is not is huge. Learn the differences in those, okay? And follow your organization's predefined change management procedures, all right? This allows all changes to be tracked, audited, okay? And it allows integrity being built into the changes that you're making. And finally here, do not rush those fixes into production, okay? Next off, recognize that all managed services are not.
Sorry, I just wanted to.
Yeah, I'm sorry, what was that?
I was just going to say about your third point, which is setting realistic SLAs. The other important thing to consider here is that when you set the SLAs, you also need a buy-in. Make sure you have the support and the buy-in from all the parties involved, right? Not just the SLA team or the support team, but also management. So because at the end of the day, you want this to be successful. You need the management needs to understand that not all SLAs can be, have to be set too high. And then you also need a buy-in from the support team because they are the ones who are going to deliver the service levels. And they also need to understand what those service levels are, and they also need a buy-in. They need to buy in into that.
Thank you. Also, recognize that all managed services are not created equal. Remember, guys, dig into those line items, okay? Make sure you understand if you're comparing two different managed services, put them up next to each other. Put those quotes up next to each other. Go through each one line by line. If there's a price discrepancy between one or the other, make sure you understand what that discrepancy is. Understand what you're getting or what you're not getting from one versus the other, okay? And also, make sure you go through some level of support and some level of triage with them. You don't want to find out how organization supports you in the middle of an incident, okay? That's probably not the optimal time. So in a less stressful time, take them through a couple of support use cases just to see how they handle it, okay? Also, remember, look at their client to analyst ratio, okay? Make sure that's acceptable. And also look into whether they're having a dedicated resource / TAM dedicated to your account. A lot of MSPs may name them different things. Some may call them program managers. Some may call them TAM. Some may call them customer support advocate, whatever. Make sure there's a dedicated person, okay, dedicated to your account that you can contact if something goes wrong, all right? Review your solution periodically for viability. Remember, collect metrics that give you insight as to how your IAM solution is performing. Stay in tune with the IAM market, okay? Understand what the emerging trends and technologies that are coming out and any types of addendums or changes to your compliance requirements or regulations that impact you. Stay on top of that as well. One thing that jumps out at me, I see that it looks as though managed services aren't being adopted in the IAM community quite as much as we anticipate.
Well, I mean, that's I'm not surprised to hear that, to some degree, Darius. And security and IAM sort of fits under the security umbrella. And I think, a lot of organizations have gotten more and more comfortable using managed services for different, platforms that support their enterprise. And we're now starting to see the trend of organizations starting to get comfortable migrating, some of those IAM services to managed service providers. I think what that kind of shows is people were dipping the toes in with off-prem and managed services type type stuff with other parts of their infrastructure, but they're literally IAM can be the keys to their kingdom. And as now as we're starting to see that transition of organizations realizing, heck, a purpose-built provider who can build out an infrastructure of an IAM platform that is all they do, and they focus on that, and they understand the security problems of identity and access management and its impact on the organization, actually does present value. So, but we're on an uptick. I think we're actually on a pretty good uptick these days, as you've seen, I'm sure. But still, there's some companies holding on to those keys, right?
Yep.
The other thing that I noticed in the poll is that the question number 4, which is, do you periodically review the quality of your IAM solution support with your end users? And quite a good percentage of the attendees here, they've answered yes to that question. So that's a good indication that organizations are on top of, making sure that the IAM solution is successful, and they are reviewing it, and from an end user perspective, they're seeing how well it works, not just from a management perspective. So that's good.
Okay, so first question, what are some of the controls to put in place when engaging a managed service provider for an IAM solution?
Definitely one of the controls you want to have in place when engaging an IAM provider for a managed solution is one we mention quite often, understanding if there is understand that there's a dedicated resource dedicated to your account. The other ones would be around SLAs, okay? SLAs, response time, kind of defining what the expectations are there and how they hand off threats. Typically, you don't want your MSSP organization to tell you there's a problem, go investigate. By the time they get to you, you want them to kind of validate the problem, tell you, confirm or deny that there's a problem, and then give you some next steps. So you want them to be more prescriptive than just point a finger and tell you to go do some research.
The other thing that I want to add to this is that I think as organizations, we need to make sure that our managed service providers, they can implement, and they can maintain a compliance program. And they should have a strong system of internal controls. They should have policies around this, control frameworks such as, let's say, ISO 27701 or the SOC 1 controls, things like internal internet access controls, application access controls, data protection policies. What are their backup policies? Or is there good cryptography within the environment? So these kind of controls should be implemented and should be maintained. And as an organization, you need to make sure that your managed service provider or your third-party support vendor demonstrates that from time to time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Next question up. What are the kinds of reports we should request from our SaaS provider who manages our identity governance solution?
Yeah, I can speak to that if you guys don't mind. There's a lot of really interesting metrics you can pull out of an IGA platform that certainly if one that's being managed by a third party that you should expect as a customer of that managed service. And obviously some of the obvious stuff is around availability and uptime, as well as any issues that might have had and average response times for tickets and things like that. But besides that, looking at pulling out some of the key metrics that define the program's success or failure, things like how many orphan accounts were discovered by the platform on a regular basis, right? I mean, that's to me, an identity governance platform that is part of its function is to kind of pull that information out, right? And by discovering where my accounts may have been, created that shouldn't, that weren't resolved. I mean, that's a real number that impacts possibly the security of the platform. Certainly reporting around, how many applications and endpoints you're managing, what's the average amount of time that's spent on fielding a request, how many access requests are made, for this platform, and how many were fielded, how many tickets and things are generated. All those numbers, for a good managed service provider should be at their fingertips, right? And those reports should be able to be easily generated. And, kind of focused towards, it's sort of related to the first questions around controls. I mean, just as Nagma mentioned, any service provider should have any of those internal controls to be able to, document and describe, the kind of accesses and things that they use internally to ensure the integrity of that environment.
Well, thank you so much. There were a couple questions we didn't get to. I'll make sure I get back to those that asked them. We're out of time and want to thank our panelists for the discussion. Our next Identity and Access Management webinar will be this fall. It was a pleasure having you join us for this panel discussion on the importance of getting support right. And we look forward to having you join us again for the next one. Thanks, everyone.